My son was Henry David. When he was born, I was surprised by how big he was, how long his hair was, and he was born just about exactly 1 year ago. It will be a year tomorrow.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Lee Red, and on this episode, Paul is telling the story about his son Henry, who was stillborn at 38 weeks due to a fetal maternal hemorrhage. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partners, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us. Happy anniversary. I don't know. I don't know how to say that, but
We're figuring that out too.
yeah, I don't know if you found out, but we found out the day before, so the 22nd, July 22nd was when Brandon was born. Or sorry, 23rd was when Brandon was born. The 22nd is when we found out he had passed. And the 22nd is a hard day. The 23rd is actually, even though it's sad, it's a nice sad day. Whereas the 22nd is just a bitter sad. So I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know how on your first anniversary, it's such new.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, such new experiences and feelings. So
yeah, there's a build up to it.
Oh.
Somehow. Some people say it's because of just the parts of the season that you experience, and just subconsciously, perhaps things start to remind you of that time.
Oh.
So I found myself thinking about it more and feeling more. Yesterday would have been the day that we found out he had died, that he did die, I believe. And then today would be the day that we were in the hospital and Erin was in labor. But it hasn't been a knife to the heart feeling for me yet. It hasn't been a terrible thing, but it has been a cause to remember more.
Yeah, I wish you the best of luck coming.
Thank you.
Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, my wife and I were in our 30s. We live in Maine. We got married in our mid-20s. So I've been married now for 7 years. And we held off on having kids. At first, that was primarily my idea. She said she agreed with it at first, but pretty soon it became apparent she really wanted kids, and I thought we should have some time first. So she went along with it. And it wasn't easy. It became clear there was a huge desire on her part to have kids, and I wanted to too eventually. So she waited with me, and then we planned to get pregnant, and we did immediately. And she had a miscarriage after about 8 weeks, I think. And that was really hard.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by how hard that was. So after that, we didn't want to give up, but it took a while to recover. And then we decided we wanted to try again. And first month, again, she got pregnant. No problems getting pregnant. So this time, it took more, and we went through the whole pregnancy experience. And she was sick at the beginning quite a bit, but it was okay. Just like a lot of nausea and feeling like life was terrible. And then that subsides, feeling pretty good.
How terrible was it? Like was she just completely because winter with Brandon was quite normal. She didn't have any sickness. But with Lucy, she was really sick with our first daughter.
Yep.
And yeah, how sick was
your
wife?
A lot.
Like,
what did you call it? Morning sickness? I discovered that is, I don't know who came up with that phrase, but it's not just in the morning. I mean, I guess some women's mostly at night.
Yeah.
It was mostly all day, but it got worse as the day went on. It was only good time was if she woke up in the middle of the night or the early morning. Before she moved, she wouldn't have anything. So and I think it was worse because we had the miscarriage. So, and she was sick with that too. And when it came to nothing, there's a lot of strong feelings about that because she had been she felt like she was, it was difficult being sick for weeks at a time. It's just not pleasant, but
Yeah.
she knew a baby was going to come at the end. And then instead she got this really painful, terrible experience. So then when she started feeling it again, it almost, I think, maybe triggered some of those same feelings.
Mm.
And I think made it harder to endure. The confidence of a baby at the end was not there.
No.
She spent most of the pregnancy worried or convinced, one or the other, that we wouldn't get to have this child either. And so I spent it trying to convince her that logically speaking, there's no reason to think we wouldn't.
Oh, that's got to be doubly painful for you.
Well, anyway,
Any crazy cravings that she had?
I don't know if I would call it craving. She did sometimes, like for oranges, big time
Oranges.
for oranges. And sometimes what was funny was just the food that didn't make her feel sick. So, for instance, it tends to be more processed foods like Hot Pockets,
Nice.
ham and cheese Hot Pockets. Those were a lifesaver at one point.
I know my wife craved. There's a little Mexican restaurant called Beto's here, and they're open 24/7. And they have a breakfast burrito that has eggs, hash browns, and you could pick the meat. And she wanted steak, and they're big. They're hefty size. All hours of the day, I need a Beto's burrito. Get me a Beto's burrito. And she'd have about 3 bites, and then she's like, "Okay, I'm done." I'm like, "Yes, I get to eat this Beto's." And I was like,
Nice.
at first I'd buy 2 of them because I was like, "Oh yeah, I can have a Beto's." And then at the end I was like, "She's only gonna have a bite or 2. I'll buy it." So yeah, it's funny what people crave. Hot Pockets. Do you like Hot
Yeah.
Pockets now?
No. No.
And
Nope. Bought the value packs.
hey, you do what you do. You do what you have to do for your wife, right?
Yeah. So we did have, towards the end of the pregnancy, we did have some, like there was like a warning sign in that she had low fluid. And so we went in for a couple extra ultrasounds and she had hydration. And then it seemed like that cleared up.
Mm.
And she's a labor and delivery nurse. That's her career. And she knows so much about it and knows how much intervention can happen unnecessarily because of the way that part of the healthcare industry has been set up these days.
Yeah.
And even taught, she taught prenatal education and tried to advise women about things that could happen. So we weren't looking for any kind of intervention. We were really trying to avoid it. And it wasn't even offered at the time, like inducing early or something. That must have been at 36 weeks or something like that. But looking back, it's hard to know that that happened. And we had overnight hydration, got the fluid levels back up, had ultrasounds, thought we were fine. And who knows if it was even related. But
Mm-hmm.
A couple of weeks later, I came home from work and Erin had been feeling strange all day and having some contractions. And in her mind, because we're now at 38 weeks and 4 days, she thought she could be going into labor. So she spent the whole day thinking, trying to prepare things, get things done, get things ready, because maybe not, but
Yeah.
maybe this
Yeah.
was it. And then when I got home, not too long after, she had the realization she hadn't felt him move all day. And she had just been to see the midwife the day before to have him checked out because it felt like he might have flipped over. So she was worried about that. And everything was fine.
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard to believe, that anything could be wrong the next day. And she took out her Doppler, which of course she was pretty skilled at using.
Yeah.
And couldn't find a heartbeat. And it was, I'm the calm one. I'm trying to just, like, is it possible that you just can't find, was there a reason why she could be in a certain position? And Erin was like, maybe and stuff. But it's like she already kind of knew this was terrible. But she just was slow to say something. And then we like laid down to go to sleep. And she's like, are you concerned about this? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Am I concerned about this? I said, we should call the midwife. And we called, told them, and we were driving to the hospital. And walking in there and going to that triage room and having them not be able to find the heartbeat, it's like your adrenaline is already pumping, like just in the bedroom before you go. It's like your body is gearing up for something.
Yeah.
And when we got there, my wife started covering her eyes with her hand because she could not allow, like, she couldn't allow light to come in. Like, she was being overwhelmed, and that was her reaction. It was just such a sad thing. The whole thing was extremely sad. So
Yeah.
there's lots of time for sadness.
Now, was this hospital the one that she works at, or?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I was. So she knew the people. Yeah, she knew the nurse who looked, and you could tell it on their faces too.
yeah. Oh,
And I just, I'm someone who always is thinking about the odds. And it's like when you get that far in a pregnancy, and there was no accident or anything,
yeah,
and to see on their faces, their looks, and to be getting bits of information like, this does not happen very often. People are kind of in shock about it. It's like, wow, this is so hard to believe that it's happening to you.
yeah. Oh, and it's gotta be so hard to go into a place that's so familiar for you guys. I'm sure you've gone into your Erin's work, and
Yeah.
some of her coworkers, and
Hmm.
having to look at them and have them tell you that this terrible news. It's got to be so hard to hear it from somebody close.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. Because I guess there's good and bad about it, but it was hard. And especially when they had to call in the ultrasound tech.
Mm.
And that person happened to actually be a personal friend to us, not just someone that Erin worked with.
Oh,
A friend, and she's a mother and she has children. And my wife couldn't really bear that thought. And then to have to see her and her try to extend her condolences, it was really awkward. And yeah, that was not fun.
mm. I guess there could be that instant support around you, or there could be like that awkwardness, like what do we say? What do we do? But
Yeah.
oh, that's got to be terrible. And about what time of night was this?
We must have gone in around 9 o'clock or 10. So then there was that experience in the triage room. And then they agreed to let us come home and gather up the things we had prepared for our trip into the hospital and then drive back with them and be admitted so that we could have an induction start.
And how was that drive home? For us, we had that same situation where we went
Yeah.
in, and I honestly can't remember it. Like, I don't even know how I got home safely.
Yeah. Right.
Like, it was
Well,
a terrible drive.
quiet. It was hard to know what to say. I don't know. I think both of us, it was like emergency situation, emergency mode. We were talking about our plans and about trying to figure stuff out. And every once in a while, I would try to say something to her on a more big picture level, but we just understood we had to go through something because it wasn't over. Now we have to go
No,
through
yeah.
this whole thing. When we gathered up the stuff, and I was thinking about all that my wife had done to prepare for this, because she had really done a good job, and she had made a couple of what are they, vision boards, poster boards covered with pictures,
Yeah.
that she had lovingly assembled with encouraging thoughts on them. And to have the backpack on and to be carrying those vision boards into the hospital, it made me so sad. It really tore me up. So there's remember an irritating woman in the emergency room, because you had to go to the emergency room then at that time of the night to get in,
Yeah.
persistently not understanding the idea that we could be coming in for an induction after hours, but yet she wasn't in labor.
Was
And
she
she
was she
insisted
an
on calling
employee
up.
an employee or just
Yeah,
somebody?
an employee who was in charge of us
Oh,
getting through into the emergency room, someone at the counter, and insisting that if she was going to come in after she had called up to make sure she wouldn't just let us in, that she had to take a wheelchair because she must be in labor if this isn't I don't know, something or some kind of
oh.
policy. And we wanted the least amount of attention possible. We just wanted to walk through and not be disturbed. And that was I remember that being pretty annoying.
Sometimes, you think this is an employee at a hospital. They've got to at least have some sort of decorum. Because there was a situation like that with us as well, where it was like, don't you understand? Like, yeah, don't you?
I don't want to have to spell this
Yeah,
out.
I don't want to have to say everything out loud for everybody to hear. Please,
Right.
just let me through.
Yeah.
And about what
So
time of the day did you guys head back up to the hospital? Was that morning, afternoon, or
No, it was just later that night.
Later that night. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we were getting in. I don't know. We got in 11, something like that. Got set up in a room, and so then I had my experience of trying to be a labor support for Erin during that whole thing. And it must be a similar, like when there's actually a good outcome expected, in that you're in this room and it becomes your reality.
Mm.
It's like this weird alternate universe. This room, it's like it encompasses everything. You like never seem to leave the room. It's day, it's night.
And they always have the soft lighting, so you have no clue what time of
So
day it is.
yeah, yeah. Trying to get sleep at some points, but of course that was impossible. And it was strange to be there. It was like the most intense pressure, stress, pain-filled experience. It felt like too much emotion was packed into a 2 day or whatever time frame to be possible.
Yeah. It really is a pressure cooker of emotions. Like I remember just passing out, like not because I was tired, just because emotionally I couldn't do it. And
Yeah,
it was like close to midnight, and we've been crying for the past 14, 15 hours, just crying our eyes out.
so much crying.
Oh yeah, and so much, every thought running through your head, like what happened, what could we have done, and you're just racking yourselves over the coals to try to you're just grasping at straws on what, yeah, and yeah, and just the emotional
Yeah.
toll just is horrible. Like you said, just horrible.
During the process of labor, you come to decision points along the way. And it was weird to have us making all the decisions that were exact opposite of what we would meet under normal circumstances.
Hmm.
Because now Erin was just wanting to have this be over as soon as possible. So we were, choosing to have things done to speed it up,
Yeah.
whatever we had to do, whatever made sense to them, you know. And I don't regret any of the decisions. It was just later on that ended up being another thing to have to get past
Yeah.
is how different the labor was than what Erin had envisioned, which she had. She couldn't help but have dreams and visions about this whole thing. She loves pregnancy. She's in love with the whole thing and ended up being so wrong. So we ended up being on so much pitocin and some kind of intervention, something about her membranes to allow her to progress quicker. And then suddenly she was in like hyperdrive with the pregnancy. The
Mm.
contractions were really strong all of a sudden, and where it had been like waiting around, slow progression, then it was like really intense all the way till the end. And we still had several hours because I don't know if it's true for other people, but when you have none of the joy, that's what we attributed it to. None of the happiness, none of the looking forward to, knowing that once you give birth, your baby's just going to be dead and then it's over. It didn't seem like her body really wanted to cooperate and move along with the process. So, like, she valiantly, I feel like, tried to go along with these really intense, like artificially intense contractions for like hours. But eventually it's like, you can't do that anymore. And so then she was asking for an epidural, which she had vowed, she was never going to do.
Yeah.
And feeling terrible about that. And I was telling her, hun, you need it. This is a special situation. So she got that. There was actually a scary, in the middle of it, in the middle of the night, the middle of the second night with the epidural, there was a scary situation where I think that the anesthesiologist who came in to do the epidural, who Erin knew, they worked
Hmm.
together
Hmm.
and felt bad for her, she administered the meds through the epidural at a higher rate than you normally would. Like in the aftermath, as we were trying to think about it, and the number came back, like the setting, it was like, yeah, that was very high. I wonder why. But anyway, I think it was too high. So Erin did feel quite a bit better with that.
For a time.
Um,
For a time being.
yeah, they got her settled and she just fell asleep. And then she woke up not being able to feel her extremities or like even roll over or hardly talk. She couldn't even talk loud enough to wake me up. And I was, of course, asleep instantly as soon as she was feeling better. Anyway, that was a scary time. She was able to ring for the nurse because the ball happened to be by her hand. I don't know. Anyway, that's probably not the point of this podcast,
Mhm.
but it was part of our
Oh
experience.
yeah.
So then there was that, and there was a photographer there because Erin had really wanted a photographer, and then we had to call her and say, "So the baby is not alive. What do you think?" I was like feeling like, so you don't want a photographer, but then Erin was thinking she wanted it even more because now these moments, that was all we were going to have.
Yeah.
And so She's like, okay, I guess I understand that. But this woman had never done stillbirth, but she had a friend that she reached out to. And this friend is like a mission for her to help people in this kind of situation, I guess, because on like no notice, she came from 2 hours away or something. And she was amazing.
Well, that's such a nice mercy right there.
Yeah.
And so let's go. The night you guys fell asleep, you had the epidural issue that got
Yeah.
resolved.
So it wasn't too much after that. Her body had like, it seems like it relaxed enough to be able to now deliver the baby.
Okay.
And that was a beautiful thing. She was able to actually slow down during that process because she wasn't in a ton of pain, but she had enough control because the epidural was sort of wearing off that
Mm-hmm.
she could ease him out and even deliver it kind of herself, like into her own hands, Henry. And I was knowing that he had died and knowing that the whole time he was a little underweight. I don't know what I had in my head, but I was expecting some kind of shriveled, I don't know, deformed runt of a baby. I don't know what I was expecting, but he was just like a perfect baby boy. He didn't have the tone in his skull, like either with his skin or muscles or whatever it was, to keep the bones of his skull shaped correctly. There was like an abnormal ridge where they weren't abutting each other correctly, which made me really sad. But other than that, he had a couple of sores on his body where skin had tore. But he was seemed so big. His hands and his feet seemed so big. That long black hair. I was not expecting that.
Now, does he get his black hair from you, or do you and Erin both have black hair?
Well, he must not. It must not have been black. I think we found out later it was really brown, dark
A
brown.
dark
But with
brown.
everything else going
Yeah.
on there, the that he was
Yeah.
caked with, it was dark
It
anyway.
was dark hair.
But yeah, that was more for me. Aaron's hair is more light brown.
Well, that's nice that you noticed that. And referring to the skull, I had no clue what to expect when Brandon was actually born, and I was actually afraid of the skull because it wasn't firm, and that really took me by surprise, and that really scared me. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been cause of trauma and nightmares for me. So
Just want to mention, my wife had been looking forward to that moment for so long. It was as if the fact that he was not alive did not prevent her from still wanting to have this experience with her new baby and even being able to find some. I mean, if you look at pictures, sometimes she has a smile on her face
yeah,
as she's cradling her son, or even like pretending to nurse her son a little bit, because the idea of having him on her breast was just such a source of meaningful envisioning for her future with her baby. And it just made me so sad to see that. When I think of that, that's one of the things that still makes me cry, is how she attempted to find, she wanted it so much. She was, anyway, I don't know how else to say it.
yeah. Winter, my wife also often says that she was proud that she carried our son and gave birth to him, and how much pride she had in doing that
Hmm.
act of service for him, even though
Hmm.
he was dead, even though he had passed away in the womb. She performed that service for him, and she was proud of it.
Hmm.
Because we did some skin to skin, and winter just like your wife Erin, she loved him. She put him on her chest as well.
Hmm.
And like you said, I saw the proud face of a mother in pain, a mother in pain. But
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine being with a child in my own body for almost 9 months and having that. Yeah, I have no frame of reference for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, did you cut the cord to your son?
I did. I feel like they could invent a better instrument for that. It felt like it was a short cord, and I felt like I almost nicked the midwife's gloved hands in the process. But yeah, I did.
Mm. And what happens afterwards for you guys?
Well, the intense experience just kept going because now we have our son and I realize this is our only time with him. And what are we going to make of it? And there's lots of decisions to make.
Yeah.
and people would come in every once in a while. But man, the staff at the hospital were amazing. The nurse we were assigned had done work with a fund that's involved in helping mothers with tragedies like this, and she herself had had several miscarriages, and she was excellent. And I felt like it was very helpful to have someone there in the room who had been through this a number of times, could speak like an authority on it, could tell you sort of how you were feeling before you could say. I felt like that was very helpful. And also could give some like context to things we had to decide, maybe about testing to be done, or how we were going to deal with the funeral home, and
Uh-huh.
saying, this is, I have seen mothers and fathers do these different things. It seems like these were things that worked out better for them, or in this case I would suggest.
Oh, that's
And I welcomed all of that.
that guiding hand. Oh, I bet that was a very good a blessing to have such an experienced guiding hand with you. So,
Yes. And having ideas of how to make memories with the limited time we had.
uh-huh.
Washing him with Erin, which Erin helped with, combing his hair, getting him dressed. You had to do it very carefully because his skin was so fragile.
Hmm.
But she was good with that. And that was, I think, very meaningful to my wife. Making hand and footprints, I guess that's pretty common, but that was also left us with good memories of him. And making a couple videos for us, taking pictures for us, like thinking of that, because the time just runs away from you and you're exhausted too, but it's like you have to try to focus on every moment. I think my best idea I had was because we were wondering what else to do and how long we were going to stay. And I said I thought we should take him out of his cooling crib that they had brought in
Uh-huh.
and put him in the bed with us and see if we could take a nap together. And so we did that.
Oh, that's got to be a special memory.
Yeah.
How long did you have with Henry?
Well, he was born just after midnight, and we left the hospital the same day, but at the end of the day. I don't know exactly what time. Maybe it was 10 o'clock or something. So just about a full day, just about 24 hours. And it just seemed, yeah, it was hard to know when to leave. That was very difficult.
Yeah.
And we were going to leave at one point, and then that same nurse I was talking to you about kind of described to Erin how you might feel, the things that might point you to knowing that you're ready to leave. And as she was doing it, my wife was like, no, I don't feel any of those things. I just think I'm feeling pressure, like I need to go, or I don't want to take people's time, because that's the way my wife is. Like, she's always thinking about, she's putting people out or
She doesn't,
something.
yeah, doesn't want to inconvenience the staff or.
Yeah. So that we stayed for several more hours after that, and then we decided it was time to go. It had to do with him being having more and more little. He actually looked, I think, from what people said, less like he was not alive and had gone through the trauma of birth, being dead, that could lead to a lot of discoloration and things. But because he had lost most of his blood anyway, it's like he was a little bit more preserved. But as time went on, more and more blood spots were coming, and he was seeping into his sheets that he was surrounded with in his clothes in the back.
Yeah.
And the more we held him, was like the more we could tell we can't really hold him anymore, because that's just gonna hurt him more, and that's only gonna make us sad probably to
Yeah.
see him
Yeah.
more and more change. So eventually we had to figure out how to do it, how to leave, and we both said some last words to him on our, like, separately, and then I think we handed him to a nurse that Erin knew well and walked out. And I think that's something that was very traumatic for my wife. It was hard for me, but like with most of the experience, it was much more of a difficult thing for my wife. That walking out of the hospital without the baby, I think that feeling has haunted her a little bit.
Yeah. I don't even know how we did it ourselves as well. It's one of those, as parents, you're charged to protect your child, but there you are walking away, and the best that you could do is hand it over to a friend. Did you guys decide to have a service, or did you have Henry
We did.
cremated, or?
We learned with the miscarriage that it was important to have something happen to give some recognition to what had happened, in order
Mhm.
to start to feel better or feel more at peace with it. Because for a while, I mean, we didn't know to do anything, but we were just trying to cope with it. And then eventually, Erin got the idea from a relative that she should name this child, even though it was only a a couple months old,
Uh-huh.
and maybe have a small thing at our house with some friends where we had some kind of ceremony to say goodbye to him, and maybe read some poetry or whatever we chose to do, bury something in the backyard. And we did that, and that made my wife feel quite a bit better. I mean, not like it was good. It was healing.
There was a
So
little bit of closure. You
yeah,
know, I don't know if that's a good word to say, but there's some closure. There's some.
yes, and feeling like that this loss is being recognized,
Mhm.
and then it's easier to feel like you can move on, as opposed to where it seems like everyone's ignoring it or it's not being acknowledged.
Yeah.
So we did want to do something after this,
Uh-huh.
but it felt overwhelming. But we had a memorial service at we don't call it a church, but at our place of worship with our
Yeah.
congregation. And someone we know very well, a good, their whole family is good friends of ours. He gave a talk about Henry and hope for seeing him again, and also comfort for people who are still alive to try to understand some of the big questions involved. And we got to, I mean, in preparation for that, we designed a program to hand out, and we made a couple of like poster board things to have set up of
Mhm.
pictures of Erin pregnant and Henry when he was born. And both of those things I think were good for us to have something to do that felt like giving, we were honoring him.
Uh-huh.
I felt like that was good. And we couldn't believe how many people came. I've been extremely impressed with the people around us, how that they haven't minimized this experience, but they knew that it would be traumatic and very painful. And like the number of people who came to that, it was as if one of us had died. And we felt really supported in that. I'm really glad we did that, as opposed to not having it, which we also could have decided, and that could be a good decision for someone else. But I'm really glad we did.
It's really hard to, in our situation, it was sort of hard to accept, even though we had friends in the neighborhood and friends in our own church. It was sort of hard to accept so much attention and support. But
Mm,
I am so very glad that we had, because we had a little service as well, and I'm glad that we were able to have so many people show up as well, and just a pat on the back and a hug, and it was nice for us as well. So
yeah,
I'm glad that
yeah.
you had a wonderful experience with your neighbors and your
we
friends.
were we were very nervous about it and thinking, how are we going to handle ourselves during it?
Yeah.
But it was very good. And to have, person after person approach you, you might think like that's just going to take everything out of me or be a bad experience, but it actually was like, it seemed like it infused us with some power. I felt like
Yeah.
to see grown men that I've known for a long time walking up to me and crying and not being able to say anything,
Yeah.
and just hug me. It was good.
Yeah.
I'm a crier. This has turned me into a crier.
It only gets worse. uh, I have become a crybaby too. And you guys are approaching tomorrow your first anniversary. How has the healing been this last year?
Wow. I can't say it's been easy.
No.
I feel like we are in a much better place now. I'm glad we've made it to a year.
Uh-huh.
And having made it to a year, I'm confident we're going to be able to make it longer. So that's good. But I mean, it was extremely difficult. I can't really imagine a worse thing to have happened to my wife than this.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was devastating. Not only did she have so much invested in her love and relationship with this child, her dreams of being a mother, there was, family issues where she doesn't have a great relationship with like her own mom, and that was brought into it, this whole thing. Then the baby dies. She
Yeah.
can't work anymore because that's just not possible. She tried after a few months, and she was so angry to be on that unit, or it could be any unit with mothers having healthy, it just was not possible. So she doesn't have something to go back to take her mind off it the same way. And so she had a job to go back to. I mean, everything just seemed to
Uh,
combine in this terrible vortex. And so it was hard at first, but then it got worse. And at times she did not want to be alive. and we needed help, and so I'm glad we could get help, but was not easy.
Yeah.
But by this point, I'm feeling a lot better about the situation.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys were able to go out and get help. I'm a big proponent of seeing a professional. I wasn't a big counselor fan or psychology fan until this happened. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I could figure it out. I could do it myself. I'm a big boy. I could do it myself. But until our son passed away, and it has been what has really helped me, seeing a counselor. So I'm glad that you guys were able to go get help and work with them. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you guys feel that I'm glad that you feel that you're doing better.
Thank you.
Paul, is there anything else that you would like to say about your son Henry and the experience of his birth and the tragedy afterwards?
What I wrote down,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever else.
It's a difficult kind of grief, and that's what we read about, to lose a child, and from a father's standpoint, even more than a mother's, but for both, that you don't know. You don't know this person, but you have this huge attachment. And so that kind of grief is like more complicated to try to even figure out what it is you're feeling or what you've lost. And so I wish I could say I knew something more about him. I feel like Henry is mostly a question mark. Erin felt like she had to feel for his personality.
Yeah.
I don't know who he was. I want to know who he was and who he will be, could be, but I can't. So what for right now, what I take with me is a memory of the precious place he held in our hearts and still does. And I think that it's something that won't be replicated, even if we end up having other children who survive. It was a unique and precious bond or place he had in our hearts.
It was beautiful. And that's the truth. It's a unique and precious part of your heart. Well, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Paul for coming on the podcast and sharing his love for his son, Henry. It is amazing how similar our stories are. It touched me and made me emotional quite a bit. Thank you, Paul, for coming on the podcast. If you'd like more information, head over to our website, stillapartofus.com. There you could find show notes about the interview and any of the resources that were mentioned. There you could sign up for an email newsletter. You could also learn how you could become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show for a few dollars a month. And there you could find out how to get in touch with us if you'd like to share your child's story on the show. We do have some wonderful news coming down the pipeline, and we can't wait to share it with you. Keep this in mind, that there is some change, good change, coming with the podcast. So thank you. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, She Dreams in Blue. You can find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it. And tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they are still a part of us. If you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat. Just get in. Sheryl Sandberg.